The darkest night. Toby burrowed deeper, the old quilt carrying Nana Elsie's familiar lavender scent, a comforting aroma from her infrequent visits. Mum often dismissed Nana Elsie's tales as far-fetched, but Toby reveled in them. Tonight's concerned sprites dwelling in the woods, diminutive beings with eyes like chips of vibrant jade who amused themselves by misplacing everyday items and whispering secrets to dreamers. And sometimes, Nana Elsie had murmured, her breath a warm puff against his ear. Sometimes socks aren't enough. Sometimes they desire something more substantial. A shiver traced Toby's spine despite the still, summer air. He pictured them, those tiny hands extending, jade eyes alight in his room's dim recesses. Now, alone in bed, the image persisted. The door edged open, Mum's form a welcome silhouette against the hall's amber glow. "Still awake, sweetie?" she inquired softly. "Just thinking about the sprites," Toby confessed, fidgeting with a thread on his blanket. Mum sighed, the mattress yielding as she sat beside him. Her scent, a blend of vanilla and diligent work, enveloped him. "Nana Elsie does spin a good yarn, doesn't she? But they're just stories, love. Make believe." Toby felt Mum missed the point. She prized reason, concrete proof. He wasn't sure he truly believed, yet a secret part, the one enthralled by Nana Elsie's fantastical realms, desperately wanted to. "Monsters aren't real, Toby," Mum continued, smoothing his hair. "Nothing hiding in the shadows, okay? Just your imagination running wild." "But what if?" Toby began, the habitual question forming. Mum forestalled him gently. "No what ifs tonight, Toby. Just peaceful dreams. I'll crack the door, all right?" A kiss on his forehead, the lingering sweetness of vanilla as she rose. "Love you. Love you too, Mum," he mumbled. The faint click of the downstairs light echoed, plunging him into near-total darkness. He waited for the receding cadence of her footsteps before reaching for the bedside lamp. The familiar radiance chased away the gloom, reassuring him. He picked up his book, a treasury of Greek myths, immersing himself in tales of courageous heroes and formidable beasts. Considerably less unnerving than Nana Elsie's forest folk. Eventually, his eyelids grew weighty. He extinguished the light, plunging the room back into shadow. That's when he noticed a difference. It wasn't just the customary nocturne, the tranquil absence of light he usually succumbed to. This was denser, almost a tangible presence. The shadows clung to the room's boundaries, heavier, more pronounced than before. Even with the meager light seeping in from the hall, his sanctuary felt amiss. He blinked, attempting to refocus. Perhaps it was his imagination, amplified by Nana Elsie's narrative, perhaps merely fatigue. His gaze fixed on the room's furthest corner, where the wardrobe loomed, always the murkiest spot, even with the lamp ablaze. But tonight, something seemed to occupy it. The darkness appeared to shift, to coalesce into an undefined, yet undeniable form. He strained, trying to discern its nature, a trick of the light on the hanging garments. His mind, fabricating sprites and specters. He squeezed his eyes shut, then reopened them. The oppressive darkness remained. The shape in the corner seemed nearer. Or perhaps its outline had simply sharpened, the edges more pronounced. He swallowed, his throat suddenly parched. He wanted to summon Mum, but a strange instinct restrained him. An apprehension that any sound would alert the thing lurking there, would draw its attention. He remained motionless, his heart hammering against his ribs. He concentrated on his respiration, attempting to decelerate it, to regain composure. Just the dark, he reasoned. Mere shadows. Nothing resided there. Yet the sensation persisted, a frigid knot of dread tightening in his gut. He felt scrutinized, as if something observed him, its presence weighty and malevolent. He blinked again. And this time, upon opening his eyes, the shape had altered. It was taller now, more defined, a contorted silhouette against the absolute black, resembling a lightning-struck tree. And another detail, one that froze his blood. It possessed no face, only an empty void where features should have been. He held his breath, eyes wide with petrification. He longed to scream, to flee, to do anything but remain there, paralyzed by terror. But he was unable to move, ensnared by an unseen force. He blinked again, his eyes burning. He fought to keep them open, to resist the urge to close them, but in vain. They fluttered shut, then snapped back open, and the shape was closer still. He could almost discern its presence, a frigid, empty abyss that threatened to consume him. It towered, a grotesque parody of human form. He squeezed his eyes shut, tears welling. He could not bear to witness it again. He waited, his body trembling, for something, anything, to occur. He kept his eyes sealed, terrified to open them, willing himself to believe it unreal. A mere nightmare, a conjuration of light, but the sensation lingered, the icy dread pressing upon him, suffocating him. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the core, that he was not alone. The air hummed with an unnatural current. He felt it on his skin, raising gooseflesh. He blinked, a shadow in the corner. The crimson numerals of the digital clock painted elongated, wavering shapes on Toby's ceiling. 3:17 a.m. A stiff neck, the first movement he'd allowed since the image materialized, prompted a subtle shift. His gaze, previously unfocused, sharpened. A swift scan of the room revealed familiar forms made grotesque by the weak light, the teetering stacks of books, a clothes pile resembling a hunched animal, the suspended model airplane. Everything appeared ordinary. Perhaps it was just a bad dream, a bizarre confluence of Nana Elsie's whimsical folklore and Mom's dedication to rational explanations. Or a vivid hallucination born of lukewarm milk and excessive screen exposure. For a fleeting moment he entertained the notion. Then he noticed it. In the room's nethermost corner, wedged between the closet and the wall, lurked a profound obscurity, an anomaly. The clock's faint red wash barely penetrated this stubborn, unnatural void. Toby's breath snagged. He strained, urging his eyes to adapt. The room seemed to conspire against him, blurring boundaries, rendering the commonplace alien. He blinked, attempting to clarify his vision, and the darkness resolved itself. It wasn't just a patch, it possessed a form, towering, impossibly so, almost brushing the ceiling. Emaciated, gaunt, like a scarecrow ravaged by winter. Its edges lacked definition, flickering and uncertain as if the shadow itself questioned its existence. Panic ignited in Toby's chest. He squeezed his eyes shut, then reopened them, begging for its disappearance. It remained, a silent, baleful sentinel. He sought a rational explanation. The coat slung over the closet door, warped by perspective and dim light, but the coat was a cheerful cerulean. It couldn't possibly birth a shadow so profound, so malevolent. Just imagination, he rasped, scarcely audible. He repeated it, louder, striving to inject conviction into the hollow phrase. Imagination, tricks of the light. The words echoed emptily in his mind, offering neither comfort nor solace. The shadow remained impassive, a stark refutation of his logic. He burrowed deeper under the covers, drawing them tight around his chin like a fragile bulwark. The cotton provided scant defense against the frigid dread that infiltrated his veins, but it was something to grasp. He fixed his gaze on the shadow, his heart hammering against his ribs. It hadn't stirred, not even an iota. Yet, it felt closer somehow, more palpable. As though patiently accumulating strength, Toby gulped, his throat parched. He yearned to scream, to summon his mom, but terror had clamped down his vocal cords. He was ensnared, locked in a noiseless confrontation with an incomprehensible darkness. He concentrated on his respiration, striving to decelerate its frantic rhythm. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. Nana Elsie always professed that controlled breathing could quell any fear. But even Nana Elsie's wisdom felt impotent in the face of this entity. The shadow undulated. A subtle alteration, almost undetectable, but Toby perceived it. One of its frayed edges seemed to extend, to reach, like a tendril testing the air. He clamped his eyes shut again, tighter still, commanding the image to vanish. He squeezed so fiercely that phosphenes danced behind his eyelids. He held his breath until his chest ached, his muscles trembled. Finally, he succumbed. He gasped, his eyes flying open. The shadow remained, and it had advanced, closer with every blink. Toby squeezed his eyes tight, then flicked them open, a self-imposed vigilance check. The shadow, still impossibly clinging to existence, had undeniably advanced. Not by much, perhaps the length of his prized race car, but the gap had narrowed. A cold knot twisted in his gut, a far more insistent sensation than the sugary warmth of his bedtime cocoa. He blinked once more. Closer still, his gaze frantically scanned the room, latching onto anything secure, anything familiar. Mr. Snuggles, his bear sporting a crooked grin, leaned against his pillow. The constellation stickers, meticulously placed on the ceiling last summer, offered a faint celestial glow in the hallway's spill of light. Even the rumpled heap of clothes on his chair provided an odd semblance of comfort. Anything beat facing that entity. He zeroed in on his toys, a sprawling panorama of plastic and fluff. The Scarlet Fire Engine, a birthday gift from Grandpa Joe, still carried the ghost of his workshop's scent. The Emerald Army men, frozen in eternal combat, stood sentinel on his bookshelf. He willed them to animate, tiny plastic guardians interposing themselves between him and the encroaching gloom. A futile thought, yet preferable to reality. He squeezed his eyes shut, banishing the shadow's image. This had to be a dream, a monstrously stubborn, vividly awful dream. Surely, if he just clamped his eyes shut, wished with every fiber of his being, he opened them. The shadow had elongated, grown gaunter, almost skeletal. The nebulous form had begun to solidify, resolving into something vaguely resembling a human figure, a grotesque, twisted imitation. Terror seized his throat, constricting his breath. He longed to scream, to summon his mom, but his voice remained trapped, choked by the swelling dread. He blinked. The air in the room felt frigid, oppressive. The musty scent of dust and old wood had yielded to something sharper, more unsettling, a blend of burnt sugar and ozone. His gaze flickered to the window. The moon, normally a reassuring beacon, was veiled behind a dense layer of clouds. He blinked. The shadow rippled, a languid, deliberate motion that sent icy tendrils down his spine. No longer pinned to the corner, it had broken free from the wall, a looming dark obelisk. The tendril he'd observed earlier, a wisp-like extension, had thickened, gaining definition, becoming more real. It took the form of a long, bony finger, gnarled and crooked. He squeezed his eyes shut, his heart thundering against his ribs. He had to remain conscious. He had to. As long as his eyes stayed open, it couldn't draw any nearer. It simply couldn't. His eyelids felt weighty, burning with exhaustion. He fought to raise them, to force them apart, but it was futile. They fluttered, then descended. He gasped, snapping them open almost immediately, yet the damage was done. It stood closer, intimately closer. He could almost taste its presence, a frigid, suffocating weight in the air. The details of its shape were now sharply defined. He could discern the suggestion of a head, elongated and malformed. The barest trace of something where a face should reside, a gaping absence, an emptiness that seemed to leach the light from the room. Toby's breath caught. He yearned to move, to flee, to burrow beneath the blankets, but his limbs felt leaden, unresponsive. He was cornered, paralyzed by stark fear, a helpless spectator in his own private nightmare. He blinked, the faceless figure. Toby strained his gaze, refusing to yield to the insistent burn in his eyelids. The room's atmosphere grew heavy, each inhalation a labored task. A form materialized against the meager light of his nightlight, a distorted mockery of a human silhouette, fundamentally askew, his focus locked onto where a face should have been. No glint of reflected light indicated eyes, no subtle gradations of shadow suggested a nose, no downturned lines hinted at a mouth. Just an unbroken expanse, a seamless plane of shadow, as if features had been meticulously erased, leaving only an absence. His heart thrummed a frantic tattoo against his ribs, the frantic rhythm echoing in his skull. This wasn't some trick of perception. It wasn't merely a coat draped over the doorframe, playing tricks on weary senses. This was something alien, something entirely outside the realm of possibility. He squeezed his eyes shut for a heartbeat, a desperate effort to reboot his vision, to banish the hallucination. But when he opened them, it remained, closer now, the stark emptiness where a face belonged even more pronounced. That lack wasn't passive, it felt like an active concealment, as though the figure deliberately obscured its true nature. Reason began to fray at the edges. He clawed for a logical explanation, some anchor in reality, exhaustion-induced hallucination, a stray fragment of dream clinging to consciousness. But the slick, icy sweat coating his palms, the coppery tang of terror flooding his mouth, the leaden weight pressing on his sternum, these visceral sensations were undeniable. His eyes darted frantically, seeking solace in the familiar landscape of his room. The bookshelf, crammed with tales of daring adventure, the luminous stars adhering to his ceiling, the threadbare teddy bear, propped against his pillow, each a faint beacon of normalcy against the encroaching dark. Yet, even these cherished possessions seemed diminished beneath the entity's oppressive aura. Then, a memory surfaced, dredged from the deep well of childhood. Nana Elsie. Her face, a roadmap of wrinkles, radiating impish delight as she spun yarns of creatures dwelling in the shadows, beings spawned from dread and sustained by the night. She spoke of shapeshifters, mimics of human form, entities that pilfered visages to wear as masks. He'd dismissed them as harmless prattle, bedtime stories meant to ignite the imagination. But now, confronted by that featureless void, Nana Elsie's pronouncements reverberated with chilling force. She had cautioned him about beings without reflection, shadows of their own, existing only at the periphery of sight. They feast on fear, Toby. She'd confided, her voice a conspiratorial murmur. The greater your terror, the mightier they grow. A new surge of fear washed over him, a tidal wave of dread. He was ensnared, immobilized not just by the thing before him, but by the dawning awareness that his fear was empowering it. He had to resist. He needed to shatter the suffocating paralysis. He attempted to speak, to scream, to even whisper a word, but his vocal cords seemed locked in place. His throat seized, his tongue felt swollen and inert. All that emerged was a stifled gasp, a pitiful whimper swallowed by the oppressive silence. The figure continued its inexorable advance. Toby could feel its presence like a tangible force, a smothering shroud of frigid, malignant energy. The air around it shimmered with subtle static, raising gooseflesh on his arms. He clamped his eyes shut once more, conjuring Nana Elsie's image, trying to summon the warmth of her smile, the soothing cadence of her laughter. He grasped at these memories as though they were a lifeline, yearning for inner fortitude, a spark of courage to push back the encroaching darkness. But the figure was almost upon him. He felt its breath, a gelid whisper against his skin. It reeked of dust and decay, of forgotten corridors and secrets best left buried. He knew, with absolute conviction, that should it touch him, should it envelop him entirely, he would be irrevocably lost. The faceless entity was not merely a monster lurking in his bedroom. It was a manifestation of his most profound terrors, a physical incarnation of the darkness that had always resided within, and it was prevailing. Fighting sleep. Toby fought the encroaching fatigue, each muscle a tight knot of protest. The gloom pulsed, a featureless void threatening to swallow him whole. Sleep, a treacherous ally, offered a silken slide into oblivion. Staying awake was paramount. He fixated on the faint, green numerals of the alarm. 3:17 a.m. An age. An age to stand guard, to battle a specter he couldn't even graze. His eyelids scraped against his eyeballs like sandpaper. He pried them further open, the burn intensifying. Moisture gathered, blurring the already vague shape lurking in the shadows. "No," he croaked, his voice raspy and thin. He swallowed, desperate for moisture. "Please, no." A blink, a mere fraction of a second, sent a jolt of fear through him. Had it gained ground? Was it nearer now? He couldn't discern. The room tilted, reality fracturing into jarring shards, his superhero poster, its grin now a mocking leer in the dimness. The scattered toys, now transformed into trip hazards. The oppressive form coalescing in the corner. Think. Just think. He needed something, anything, to occupy his mind, to beat back the suffocating weariness. He dredged up multiplication tables from school. 7 times 8, 56. 7 times 9, 63. The numbers echoed emptily, providing no purchase on the real world. He recalled his mother's words, grounded, practical reassurances. Monsters aren't real, Toby. It's just your imagination working overtime. He conjured her face, her brow creased with worry, her hand smoothing his hair. He clung to that vision, a fragile raft in a sea of darkness. But the image flickered, threatened by the climbing tide of dread. She didn't understand. She hadn't witnessed it. She hadn't felt the glacial chill seeping from its core. He regulated his breathing, attempting to slow the frantic hammering of his heart. In, out, in, out. Each breath felt insufficient, unable to fill the cavernous emptiness growing within. His eyelids twitched spasmodically. He dug his fingernails into his arm, a sharp, stinging sensation bringing momentary respite, quickly swallowed by the overwhelming exhaustion. He sought a memory, a bright memory, to combat the stifling terror. His 10th birthday surfaced, the bouncy castle, the towering chocolate cake, the joyous shouts of his friends. It felt distant, detached, like viewing someone else's life. The shadow undulated, or perhaps it was just a trick of the light, warped by his blurring vision. But this time it felt larger, denser, more substantial. A wave of resignation broke over him. He lacked the strength. He was too drained. He whispered, his voice a fragile thread, "Mom?" He imagined her bursting through the door, flipping on the light, dispelling the gloom and the dread it harbored. But she remained absent, asleep, secure in her room, unaware of his torment. He was marooned. A blink, one tiny, insignificant blink, and that was all it took. The darkness surged, engulfing him in a choking embrace. He gasped, a silent scream trapped within his lungs. The featureless thing was close, its presence a crushing weight, suffocating him. He squeezed his eyes shut, tears tracing paths down his cheeks. This was the end. He was lost. Then, a spark ignited within, a flicker of resolve buried deep. He refused to surrender. He wouldn't let it triumph. He would resist. Whispers in the dark. At first, Toby chalked the sound up to the house's age, its timbers sighing, the wind keening through window cracks, just the usual nocturnal chorus. Yet, submerged within that familiar backdrop, lurked something alien, a fragile susurrus, like sere leaves scraped across concrete, barely audible from the darkest corner of his room. He stilled, every nerve alight. Though the shadow remained a shapeless blot against the wall, the air surrounding it thrummed with a subtle, unnerving vibration. He concentrated, angling his head, attempting to isolate the sound. It came again, a soft, hissing murmur, too garbled for distinct words, yet undeniably there. Toby's pulse quickened, a frantic drumbeat against his ribs. Imagination, he reasoned, the byproduct of dread and weariness. Nana's tales, his own insecurities, conspiring to fabricate this waking nightmare. But the murmur persisted, a constant, gnawing presence at the fringes of his perception. He clutched Barnaby, his mother's old bear, the worn fur offering little comfort. Barnaby's button eyes, vacant and glassy, reflected no solace. Toby tightened his grip, seeking refuge in the faintly mildewed scent, a reminder of the tangible world beyond this room. The whispering intensified. He could almost discern distinct sounds now, fractured and warped, like fragments of conversations bleeding through a partition. It resembled his name, Toby. The murmur resonated with a chilling intimacy, a disturbing recognition that sent a shard of ice through his system. It wasn't just auditory. It was a sensation, a prickling awareness of being observed, scrutinized, known intimately. He recoiled against the headboard, drawing the blanket to his throat. His breath hitched. He longed to scream, to summon his mother, but terror had seized his voice. The shadow seemed to dilate, expanding imperceptibly, and the whispers swelled, congealing into something akin to speech. The words remained elusive, yet the intent radiated, aimed squarely at him. Afraid. The whisper seeped into his consciousness, bypassing his ears entirely. A direct infusion of fright, a concentrated dose of apprehension that rooted him to the spot. His core fear of the encompassing dark, of lurking monsters, of utter solitude, weaponized against him. He squeezed his eyes shut, seeking to extinguish the sight, the sound, the sensation. He recalled his mother's soothing tone, assuring him fear was merely a feeling, impotent unless embraced. But this felt different, tangible, more than just a feeling, a menace. Lonely. The whisper burrowed deeper, preying on his feelings of alienation, his sense of otherness, of never quite fitting in. The shadow possessed an uncanny knowledge of him, of his frailties, It knew the precise language to shatter him. Toby balled his fists, nails biting into his palms. He had to resist. Denial was not an option. He conjured Nana not as the spinner of fantastical yarns, but as the staunch, enduring woman who had confronted adversity and bereavement with steadfast fortitude. He envisioned his mother, her unwavering affection and faith, her belief in him, even amidst his self-doubt. He opened his eyes, fixing his gaze on the shadow. It remained, looming and murmuring, endeavoring to unravel him from within. But something had transformed. He was no longer solely gripped by fear. Anger surged. He lacked the means to combat it, the weapon to wield against this formless entity, but surrender was unthinkable. He refused to be devoured by his dread. He would not cede victory to the darkness. "Go away," he uttered, his voice trembling yet resolute. The whispering ceased, superseded by a silence so complete it bordered on unbearable. The shadow persisted, a looming sentinel, biding its time. But for the first time, Toby detected a nascent hope, a fragile spark of defiance in the face of crushing dread. The contest had only just commenced, a mother's doubt. Toby bolted upright, his pulse a frantic drum solo against his ribs. The air still thrummed with the residue of the shade's murmur, a bone-chilling chorus of his most private terrors. He couldn't bring himself to glance at the spot where it had lingered. Instead, he lurched towards the exit, his bare soul smacking against the frigid floorboards. He needed to confide in someone. He had to elicit belief. He plunged into the hallway, the sudden brightness momentarily blinding him. Silence clung to the house, the thick quiet of pre-dawn. A crack of light spilled from his parents' room, etching a bright line onto the floor. He crept toward it, his breath hitching in ragged bursts. "Mom?" he breathed, his voice a mere puff of sound. "Mom, please get up." He nudged the door wider and slipped inside. His mother slumbered, her sable hair fanned across the pillow. His father was absent. A gentle, measured snore filled the chamber. He reached out, gently nudging her shoulder. "Mom, wake up. There's something in my bedroom." Mrs. Maxwell stirred, a soft groan escaping her lips. She blinked, her gaze struggling to coalesce. "Toby, what is it, sweetheart? What hour is it?" "It's still before sunrise," he stammered, gesturing weakly toward his room. "Something's in my room, Mom. A shadow. It was talking." He scrutinized her face, desperately seeking a flicker of comprehension, of credence. But her features remained veiled in sleepiness and a touch of irritation. She sat upright, sweeping her hair away from her face. "A shadow? Honey, you likely just experienced a nightmare." "No, Mom, this wasn't a dream. It was tangible. It was immense, and it knew my fears. It uttered things." He struggled to articulate the visceral dread that still possessed him, the way the darkness had seemed to siphon his deepest anxieties and weaponize them against him. "Things? What sort of things?" she inquired, her tone softening. She reached for him, drawing him close and encircling him with an arm. "Frightening things," he mumbled, burying his face in her shoulder. "About solitude, about creatures lurking underneath my bed." He loathed admitting it, even to her. It sounded so infantile, so absurd. Mrs. Maxwell sighed, a sound heavy with the world's burdens. "Toby, there aren't any monsters beneath the bed. You're beyond the age for fearing such things. It was merely a bad dream. Your imagination is simply overactive." "But Mom, I witnessed it. It was right there, in the corner. It kept advancing." He pulled back, his pupils dilated with desperation. "You have to believe me." She regarded him, her expression a blend of solicitude and exasperation. "Sweetheart, I understand you're frightened, but occasionally, when we're weary, our minds deceive us. There's a rational explanation for everything. Perhaps the streetlight projected a peculiar shape on your wall. Perhaps you detected a sound outside and it startled you. But the whispering," he pressed, his voice quivering, "the whispering was probably just the breeze, or perhaps you were mumbling in your sleep." She offered softly, "Come, let's investigate." She swung her legs over the side of the bed, shrugging into her robe. Toby wavered, his stomach twisting with apprehension. He recoiled from returning there, but he tailed her, clinging to her robe's edge like a safety rope. They stepped into his room, Mrs. Maxwell flicking on the light switch. The space seemed ordinary, illuminated by the bedside lamp's gentle radiance. His playthings were strewn on the carpet, his books stacked high on his desk. Everything appeared in order. "See?" she remarked, gesturing around the room. "There is nothing here, only your thoughts." Toby gazed at the corner where the spectre had been, his heart plummeting. It was vacant. The blackness seemed to have dissipated, erasing any evidence of its prior presence. Had he conjured it all? Was he merely a terrified child, petrified of the dark? I suppose so," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. A wave of humiliation washed over him. He had roused his mother, interrupted her rest, all for naught. "Mrs. Maxwell tousled his hair. "It's all right, darling. It happens to everyone. Now, return to bed. You'll perceive things differently come morning." She tucked the blankets around him, her touch comforting yet detached. She kissed his forehead. "Try to get some shut-eye, and don't fret. I'll leave the hall light illuminated, okay?" She extinguished the bedside lamp and departed, leaving the door cracked open. The hallway's glow spilled into his room, banishing the deepest shadows. But it failed to dispel the dread, the chilling conviction that he had experienced something authentic, something truly frightening. He lay rigid, staring at the ceiling, his thoughts spiraling. If his mother disbelieved him, who would? He felt isolated, utterly, terrifyingly isolated. The whispering resumed, but now it resonated within his mind. Uncontrollable blinks. Toby clamped his eyes shut, then flung them wide, a desperate attempt to ward off the encroaching gloom. 1, 2, 3 rapid blinks, each a tiny surrender to the suffocating dark. He had to resist, God, he had to, but his lids betrayed him, twitching like panicked birds against his will. His vision blurred, the familiar angles of his room twisting into grotesque mockeries. The plush giraffe on his desk grinned with sinister glee, its button eyes gleaming like chips of obsidian. Wall posters morphed into grim tapestries, populated by spectral figures that beckoned with silent promises. Each involuntary flicker intensified the horror, imbuing the phantasm with terrifying substance. Panic constricted his throat. He tried to shout for his mother, for anyone, but his vocal cords were seized, his throat parched as the desert floor. Only a feeble, pathetic rasp escaped, swallowed by the room's oppressive quiet. The shadow, closer now, solidifying with each unwelcome blink. No longer a vague presence lurking in the periphery, but a looming, ebony tower at the foot of his bed. He felt its gaze, an icy, invasive pressure that stole the air from his lungs. He fixed his gaze on the digital clock's faint luminescence. 3:17 a.m., a mundane time. But here, in this room steeped in unnatural twilight, it felt plucked from nightmare, a sliver of the witching hour made real. He squeezed his eyes shut again, holding them tight with every ounce of remaining will. Don't give in, don't give in. The mantra hammered inside his skull, a desperate plea against the inevitable. His eyelids throbbed, a burning ache, but he held firm. Then, a novel torment, a crawling sensation deep inside his sockets, like invisible insects scuttling across his eyeballs. It was unbearable, a subtle torture designed to erode his defenses. His eyes watered, further obscuring his sight. He strained to focus on a single detail, a flaking patch of paint on the ceiling. Anything to ground him, to combat the spiraling vortex of dread threatening to pull him under. But the shadow was implacable. It bled into his peripheral vision, a creeping darkness poised to engulf him. His head spun. He felt weightless, nauseated. The air thickened, pressing on his chest, making each breath a struggle. He gasped, fighting to fill his lungs, and then it was upon him. He hadn't blinked, he was certain, but somehow, impossibly, the shadow had breached the distance. It towered, a featureless void that eclipsed everything else. Its presence was overwhelming, a suffocating blanket that devoured the light. He felt its breath, a frigid exhalation against his skin, carrying the scent of dust and decomposition. It smelled of forgotten corners, of the forbidden basement, of the cobwebbed attic. It smelled like raw, distilled fear. He tried again to scream, but the sound remained trapped, a silent imploring. His body quaked, every muscle rebelling, yet he was paralyzed, immobilized by pure terror. The shadow extended an appendage, a skeletal hand reaching out, its fingers like honed blades. He squeezed his eyes shut, anticipating the impact, the inevitable touch of the abyss. But it never came. Instead, a voice, hollow and devoid of warmth, resonated in his mind. "Toby," it breathed, the sound a venomous caress slithering into his consciousness. "Don't struggle, surrender." His resolve shattered. He was exhausted, utterly drained. The battle was too much, the terror too consuming. He longed for it to end. He desired the darkness to claim him, to engulf him entirely, to obliterate everything. His eyelids trembled, then yielded. This time, there was no resistance. He welcomed the darkness, embraced oblivion. He let it in. The long blink. His eyelids crashed down, not a gentle blink, not a weary lowering, but a brutal collision, trapping him in absolute night. It wasn't just the absence of light. It was the suffocating weight of the void itself, a palpable pressure against his face, a thick miasma invading his lungs, a shroud woven from his most terrifying visions. He gasped, sightless, utterly bereft of light. His other senses flared, amplifying the sounds crowding in. The grandfather clock's steady pulse in the hall, once a comforting rhythm, now echoed like the predatory beat of some lurking beast. The old house's settling groans morphed into insidious murmurs. The wind-stirred leaves outside became the sinuous rustle of something immense and unseen. He conjured it. He knew it was there, mere inches away, the lurking shape. He could almost taste its non-existent breath on his skin, a frigid exhalation carrying the scent of stale earth and grave dust. It stretched against the canvas of his inner eye, a shifting, nebulous form like roiling smoke. He clenched his lids tighter, a futile attempt to retreat inward, to flee the inevitable. But the gloom had seeped into him now, no longer an external force. It throbbed within his veins, resonated in his pulse, a chilling symphony of dread. The question, once a curious spark, now reverberated with sinister intent. Suppose this was the end. Suppose this blink was his last glimpse. Suppose the specter sought not just to frighten, but to obliterate. His thoughts stampeded, desperately seeking an anchor to reality. He recalled his mother's radiant smile, the comforting warmth of her hand, the delicate fragrance of her lavender soap. He remembered childhood sandcastles built with his father, the ocean's salty kiss, the sun's caress on his skin. He pictured his friend Mikey, his infectious laughter echoing as they raced downhill, wind-whipped hair flying. Yet even those precious recollections flickered, consumed by the encroaching darkness. The shadow intensified, its influence permeating his very being, warping joyous memories into grotesque mockeries. His mother's smile twisted into a horrifying grimace, his father's hand became a skeletal claw, Mikey's laughter a jeering shriek. He steeled himself, every muscle taut. Cornered and trembling, he prepared to fight. He would not succumb quietly. He would not allow this thing to consume him. But what could he do? Trapped, helpless, at the mercy of a being he couldn't comprehend, a phantom born of his own deepest terrors. He waited, each second an eternity, an excruciating countdown. He could feel the presence closing in, a crushing weight on his chest. He thought he could discern its voice, a low, guttural rumble resonating within the depths of his soul. "Welcome home, Toby." His heart hammered, a frantic percussion against the silence. Bile rose in his throat. His skin prickled with a million icy pinpricks. This was it. He yielded, not as a surrender, but as an acceptance. He shut down his mind, his heart, his very soul. He relinquished the memories, the fears, the hopes, the dreams. He embraced the abyss, the oblivion, the nothingness. Come, take him, end it all. He was ready. Or so he believed. An empty room. Toby opened his eyes. He expected to see it, that grotesque parody of a man, its featureless face looming inches from his own. He anticipated the icy breath, the weight of its despair pressing down on him, crushing the last embers of hope. But it wasn't there. He was alone. He blinked again, slowly this time, searching the corners of the room, expecting it to materialize from the shadows. Nothing. The oppressive weight that had been suffocating him for what felt like an eternity had lifted. He felt lighter, empty. He sat up in bed, a strange disorientation washing over him. The room was exactly as he remembered it, yet wrong, terribly wrong. His posters of fantastical creatures, once vibrant and inspiring, now seemed dull, faded. The familiar scent of old books and lemon-scented cleaner was replaced by a sterile, almost metallic tang. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, his bare feet landing on the worn carpet. The texture felt unfamiliar, coarse beneath his toes. He stood, his legs shaky, and took a tentative step forward. The floorboards didn't creak under his weight, an unsettling silence that amplified the hollowness within him. The bedroom lights were still on, their harsh glare reflecting off the pristine surfaces of his desk and dresser. Long, distorted shadows stretched across the room, mimicking the shapes of his belongings, yet lacking their substance. A chill permeated the air, a bone-deep coldness that had nothing to do with the temperature. Where was he? Or, more accurately, who was he? He reached out, his hand hovering over the surface of his desk. The wood felt smooth, cold, utterly devoid of the warmth and history he associated with it. He picked up a small, intricately carved wooden dragon, a gift from his grandfather. It felt foreign in his hand, a meaningless object stripped of its sentimental value. Panic began to claw at the edges of his mind. He tried to remember anything, his family, his friends, his dreams. But the memories were fragmented, distant, like faded photographs viewed through a thick fog. He knew he should remember that these things were important, but the emotional connection was gone. He stumbled towards the door, his hand reaching for the doorknob. It was colder than it should be, the metal radiating an unnatural chill. He hesitated, a sense of dread washing over him. What lay beyond this room? What awaited him in the darkness? He opened the door, peering out into the hallway. It was deserted, silent. The only light came from a distant lamp, casting long, eerie shadows that danced along the walls. He took a step into the hallway, then another, his movements hesitant and uncertain. "Toby?" The voice was soft, sleepy, vaguely familiar. He turned, his heart pounding in his chest. Mrs. Maxwell, his next-door neighbor, stood in her doorway, peering at him through bleary eyes. She was wearing a faded floral dressing gown, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. "Toby, is that you? What are you doing wandering around at this hour?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. He stared at her, his mind struggling to make sense of the situation. Mrs. Maxwell. He knew the name, recognized the face, but, "Are you all right, dear? You look a bit pale," she said, taking a step towards him. He couldn't speak. He wanted to ask her where he was, who he was, but the words wouldn't come. He felt like an imposter, a stranger in his own life. "Go back to bed, Toby," Mrs. Breveryforth. Maxwell said gently, her voice laced with a hint of impatience. "It's late. Your mother will be worried." His mother. The word triggered a faint spark of recognition, a flicker of warmth in the cold emptiness within him. But the feeling was fleeting, quickly extinguished by the encroaching darkness. He simply stared at her, his eyes wide and vacant. Mrs. Maxwell sighed, shaking her head. "Kids these days," she muttered under her breath, "always up to something." She retreated back into her apartment, closing the door behind her with a soft click. Toby remained standing in the hallway, alone in the silence. He looked back at his bedroom, the open doorway beckoning him. He took a deep breath and stepped back inside. The bed was empty. The sheets were neatly tucked in, the pillows plumped. It looked as if no one had slept there at all. Toby was gone. Only an empty bed remained.